Lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings? Represented a guy that stole 3 trucks from his work. Only 2 were recovered before trial. He showed up to a motion hearing in the 3rd one. Oops. I took my ex to court because she had used my social security number to sign up for cable. I found out about it when she stopped paying for the service. She screwed herself over by just being herself. We show up to court. I turn in the contract from the cable company, showing my social security number and her own name signed on the contract. She didn't even try to forge my signature. She signed her own name in and tried to deny that she had any part of it. The judge tore her apart and it was nice. Not someone else, but my client screwed themselves. I'm doing landlord-tenant stuff and my client was facing eviction over non-payment, but the client was withholding rent payments because of habitability issues in the apartment. No heat, high lead levels, vermin. This is gonna be an easy win for me. Told my client continually to make sure they don't spend the money. Keep it but don't spend it. Because if you show the judge you still have the money, it looks real good for you in terms of making the judge believe that you're withholding for good reasons. We get up in front of the judge. Landlord doesn't have an attorney, so I'm dancing inside. There's no way I can lose. I make my arguments and the landlord makes his. Judge asks my client if they still have the money. Client goes, "Nah, I blew that crap at the casino last week." What a dumb C. My wife is the lawyer. Info: when children reach the age of majority, if they do not continue studying and start working, it is not necessary to pay alimony. Info: my wife's client found a new lover, which unleashed the wrath of the ex-wife, who started asking for more alimony for her children. Well, to win the case, it was necessary to prove that the children were working, but they could not get any proof of it. There was not much chance of winning, but they still went to court hoping that with the interrogations they could find information that would put them in evidence. On the day of the trial, the children did not go. Only the mother and her lawyer were present. Judge: "Madam, tell me why your children could not come." Mom: "They could not get permission at work." Judge: "Lawyer: Mom." Another few seconds of silence. Judge: "Well, that was fast." The fact that you can't force your parents to pay for college, unless they're divorced, has always made me think that someone should make a movie about it. Basically the reverse parent trap. Trying to get mom and dad to divorce, so you can have the courts force dad to contribute to your college tuition. I had a client who was trying to get away from an abusive ex and filed for a restraining order. He shows up to the final hearing and is making a big fuss about a truck that they bought during their marriage. He said it was just his, and she had no rights to it because their marriage was void. I asked him on cross-examination what he meant by that, and he said that he had already been married in another state when he married my client. He said that my client had no idea, but that it means their marriage is invalid and the truck was all his. Not only is that legally inaccurate, the transcript of the hearing was promptly turned over to the police, who were actively investigating him for bigamy. Oh, and the judge gave my client the truck along with a 2-year no contact order. But a friend kept meticulous records of how much time his estranged wife spent with their daughter. He used pink highlighter for mom and blue highlighter for himself. Mom sailed into arbitration demanding full custody and handsome child support in the house. Dad pulled out 3 years' worth of year-long calendars. Mom had spent less than a full month with the child in 3 years. Mom was not happy with the outcome. A witness for the plaintiff in a civil suit, who was a co-worker of the plaintiff, testified very strongly against the company and in favor of the plaintiff. I questioned her about bias toward the plaintiff, if they knew each other well, were friends, etc. She said, "No, just friendly co-workers, work friends at best." I pinned her to it. When I got a chance to cross-examine the plaintiff, she had no choice but to burn her witness's credibility, because not only were they very close friends, but they had become sisters-in-law just a few years before. No, they did not have the same last name or anything, but I had done my homework. I still don't get why people want to fight small bias by destroying their credibility, but it happens more than you think. I am being sparse on details here due to confidentiality, but I had a client who was accused of a very nasty physical offense. He had an alibi. He was at work, where he was the boss. He had an employee who could absolutely vouch for his being there. I talked to the employee. Employee confirmed this. It gets closer to the trial, and around the time when I need to send in an alibi notice, which is advance notice to the Crown so that they can investigate the alibi and determine whether or not it's true. But I am being careful, so I call the employee up again. Turns out my client fired him in the interim, and so the employee quite candidly tells me, "Oh, yeah, he was definitely at work, but that's not what I'll say in court. Frick that guy, he is going down. I did not call him as a witness, or file the alibi notice. Still won the trial. But if I hadn't thought to call the guy, or if he'd been less candid, my client would have been fricked hard. Diddler registry, jail time, the works. Completely innocent." Too many criminal client situations to count of them screwing themselves over. One of the very few family law cases I handled as a young atty sticks out to me though. Young woman and young man have child. Young woman seeks divorce from young man because he enjoys the thug life. He had recently been arrested and charged for possession W and to distribute M, felony, and in possession of a firearm, and lawful carry. Young man doesn't like her leaving him. He hires a local big name top divorce atty. Granted, very rural area. Gets temp divorce order entered saying she cannot have overnight guests of the opposite gender. Common in rural conservative areas. Think it's mostly a thing of the past in more urban places. Young woman starts seeing someone new. Young man is very upset about this. Has his fancy lawyer ask for a hearing accusing her of violating court order and seeking full custody, on top of atty fees. Young woman, on advice from a mutual friend, hires me for this hearing. I sit down with opposing counsel, and she basically tries to strong-arm me her experience and lays out egregious terms. Mother must not only give up primary custody, but must have visitation with a supervisor and pay child support and atty fees. She knows I'm a new baby atty in town. Fairly certain I had been licensed for less than a year. I book and she says she'll see us in court. I go into hearing with a copy of his probation arrangement on his posse W intend to sell and unlawful carry. He hasn't told his atty about this, and she is unaware. She calls him up, establishes how my client had her new BF over on X, Y, Z nights. Judge is very conservative, not pleased. Then, opposing counsel passes the witness. I ask him if he has a job. Number. What do you do for money? Things here and there. Oh, Ms. Opposing counsel is awfully expensive. Do you sell M? What? Have you ever sold drugs to make ends meet? I number introduce a copy of his guilty plea and straight probation sentencing. Judge is now staring daggers at him. I lean over to my client sitting next to me and whisper, if you took a drug test today, be honest, would you be completely clean? Yes. I ask the young man, when was the last time you did M? Atty objects. Big judge overrules. I know this judge will drug test people on the spot as he is also the misdemeanor drug court judge. It's been years. I'm clean. So, if you were tested, you'd be clean? Yes. Opposing counsel asks the same of my client. We agree. Judge has them both tested. He tests positive for M. My client is clean. Judge denies his motion and asks me to send in new temp orders where young man is required to maintain employment and start paying child support and places him on supervised visits. Icing on the cake, opposing counsel actually calls me and leaves me a voicemail congratulating me on, and I quote, handing her butt to her for the first time in a long time. That last part is nice. Your opponent didn't take it personally and even showed respect. Nice. More of a case of screwing himself over. But here goes. This was a case another prosecutor in my office had a few years back. 30-year-old defendant was charged with physical shaming a child after he got his girlfriend's 14-year-old sister pregnant. She actually kept the baby, so the police just waited and got a paternity test. No surprise. Defendant was the father. Defendant wanted probation. Prosecutor refused to offer it. He decided to plead guilty and have a jury trial on punishment. Here in Texas, you can choose to have the jury set punishment. Evidence mostly proceeded as expected. The victim testified to having consensually, aside from not being old enough to consent, frick the defendant, getting pregnant, etc. Paternity test introduced. Defendant took the stand. His version of events was that he snuck into victim's room at night, covered her mouth, and held her down while he forcibly had fricked her against her will. It seemed like his own lawyer had no idea that's the story he settled on. The jury deliberated about 15 minutes before returning a verdict of 17 years, the maximum possible, as charged was 20. When interviewed by the attorneys afterwards, one of them said they decided on 17 years so the defendant would never forget the age of consent in Texas again. Not a lawyer, but happened to me and some buddies in college. So a group of friends and I rented a 5-bedroom house in college. And being the group of guys, we were partied pretty hard and were really rough on the house. We knew going in we were not getting our deposit back. Well, part way though living there, the septic started to have some problems. Whenever someone used the downstairs shower, it would drain slowly, i.e. slowly fill as you used it. Also, one of the room's carpet would get wet. So we emailed the property service company to fix it. 2 weeks later they send out a plumber to snake the line and leave. Well, that didn't fix it. So we emailed again. 2-3 weeks. Plumber, snake, leave. Still not fixed. Email and 2-3 weeks and they scope the line. Turns out roots had grown into the line, so they had to do a big old process to completely remove all the roots. Now it's fixed. Well, we all move out. Go or separate ways. One of my buddies goes to Australia for 9 months. When he gets back he comes home to a bunch of voicemails. Turns out the property company is coming after us for like $5,000 on top of the deposit. They tried to pressure him into either paying the money or he would be taken to court. He told them he would see them in court. For the couple months leading up to the court date he would get calls telling him to pay and it would all go away. Day before the first day of court they call him and tell him to pay $2,000 and give them info for one of the other people on the original lease. He says go to heck and see you in court. First day of court is just to make sure everyone shows and to schedule the actual case. Lawyer for the property company shows up, is scrambling to figure out what is going on. Had no records beyond the original lease, which changed a couple times as people moved in and out. My buddy helps him out by giving him copies of the multiple emails that we sent to get them to fix the septic and the damage it did to the house. Told my buddy he would let us know how they wanted to proceed. Never heard from the company again. Someone I knew had a pro deo case where she had to defend a person who had been charged with a criminal offense. Don't know what, confidential and whatnot. Even though the police and could pretty much pinpoint the crime to her client, there was no evidence to tie him to the crime, circumstantial at best. She had instructed him to shut up and let her do the talking during the trial, as from experience the client sometimes does not know how to answer a question properly. She pleads and can show that the court has nothing on her client. She feels that for once, a prodeo case is going her way. After her plea, the judge thanks her for her plea and turns to her client. He asks if the client had something to add to the plea. Client looks at her, back at the judge, tears well up in his eyes and he blurts out, "I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again." She threw her notes and everything else she had in her hands at the client. Now convict. Apparently, she basically got screwed by her own client, who screwed himself even worse. Prodeo is the old term in our jurisdiction, same connotation as pro bono. This ain't my first prodeo. Well, not my story, but a prior boss's story. They had a drunk driver kills a car worth of people case at the time when they were a general practitioner. My boss was representing the family that got hit, one where the 2 kids and the wife had died, but the father had not, and wanted the college guy's drunk driving skin to be mounted on a wall. This was back before Facebook was commonly used in court proceedings and before tons of people realized that crap is too great for any attorney worth their weight in salt to pass up. So, the kid, drunk driving college kid, had managed to get the judge's sympathy during the first part of the hearing by saying he was sorry, haunted, never going to drink again, this was going to ruin his life, etc. The judge seemed to really be eating it up. Then comes my boss and immediately burns this kid's remorse to the ground by showing numerous Facebook statuses and photos of them binge drinking, partying, and even joking about driving drunk from the date of the accident up until a night ago. The kid looked like he was being forced to swallow hot coals and the judge was absolutely livid. Needless to say, the kid had to do way more than just apologize and be remorseful after that. Here's kind of an anti-story for balance. My marriage with my ex-wife fell apart a while back and she probably cheated on me and I probably drank too much to be a good husband and we argued and separated. It could have gotten messy at this point if either of us decided to be vindictive, but at this point we knew it was over and our main priority was the kids. Custody was never an issue because the older kids could choose where they wanted to stay at any given time. They chose to stay with me most of the time. And although we arranged a timetable for the younger kids, they could come and go as they pleased if they were staying with friends in the neighborhood, etc. Child support was also not an issue as I'm not a dong and am happy to pay my share towards giving them a decent life. I don't count what it costs when they're with me and I pay half towards school costs, clothes, outings, etc. On the morning of the divorce proceedings we met for coffee before going before the judge. The judge proceeded to ask us what contracts we had signed for the mortgage, custody, child support, etc. And we just said none. We had it worked out. The judge was incredulous and asked several times, "Are you sure? This is highly irregular." We still have occasional arguments on the details that we have to work out as adults, but yet, tomorrow I might get in from work to find one of the younger kids in front of the TV in an unscheduled visit, or I might get a text for half the cost of a school outing next week, and that's all fine by me. Honestly, this is incredible. Really refreshing after this really sad thread. I had this one moment that is my favorite to share, so excuse me if it is floating around Reddit already. I was litigating a custody dispute on behalf of the mother in an incredibly conservative jurisdiction. One of the most common ways to get custody was to allege sex or pee addiction because the threshold for it was basically non-existent. For this hearing, however, we lucked out with the judge, who I knew from other cases. Opposing counsel tried to gotcha me into settling before the hearing by showing me surprise sexts between mom and her new boyfriend. This is, of course, not law and order and you can't introduce surprise evidence. So we go through with the hearing. I object to the obscene texts, but say I would allow them to be read into the record, in their entirety. So the uptight, very conservative local attorney gets to spend the next 25 minutes or so reading obscene texts in open court, occasionally asking if she could gloss over parts, but no, I didn't feel it would be appropriate. I'll never forget hearing her struggle with the word nipple. It's not even a dirty word. But this was like the third hearing we had to amend custody because this guy felt his ex-wife having a boyfriend meant she was an info. They alleged the obscene texts happened while the kid was in mom's custody, but they based that on the timestamp of the screenshots. The timestamp on the texts was clearly at a time when the kid was not even around and mom was safe to get freaky over the phone. The judge had heard enough of his balls and awarded attorney's fees and put in the order, consistent with the vexatious litigant statute, that if dad would continue to be liable for her attorney's fees if he kept pushing this crap. It was the only joy I got from practicing family law. Not a lawyer, but I sat on the jury of a man who was accused of molesting his 10-year-old niece. He elected to testify in his own defense and his defense was, "I did it, but it was her idea." It was his third felony strike, so he will be spending, with luck, the rest of his life in prison. Not a lawyer, but this story always gets me. My biological grandmother died 20 years ago of ovarian cancer. She left all her money, trusts, bonds to my grandfather to use while alive and disperse after death. My grandfather remarried something like 15 years ago to my step-grandma. My grandfather ended up dying first a few years back. My step-aunt is a greedy bee who lives on the opposite side of the country. She's lived off of her mother and my grandfather for all of her life. She'd come over and take them on vacation where she'd use their money to buy herself things and get a free skiing trip about 8x a year. After my grandfather passed, my step-grandma had to move where her children live to get care for dementia. My step-aunt has access to not only her own mother's estate but my grandfather's as well to take care of her needs. That wasn't enough. She decided to try and sue my dad and uncle for their dead biological mother's estate. My dad is bilaterally paralyzed and in a wheelchair. My uncle is a triple bypass survivor with a pacemaker and multiple stints. Both are on fixed disability income. The court date came and I literally wheeled my dad in while my uncle walked with a cane. My step-aunt is entirely able-bodied and rolling in the millions my step-grandma and grandfather worked their whole lives to earn. The judge took one look at the whole picture and she was absolutely denied access to my biological grandmother's estate. We were there for less than an hour. Dog, absolutely frick your aunt. Not caught, but live PD traffic stop I was watching and the guy told the officer I have caffeine pills in my back pocket, gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. Dude then comes clean and says it's Molly, and the officers look at each other and go, do we even have a test kit for that? Other officer says no. Dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. I was a very new lawyer with no bankruptcy experience. A partner sent me to bankruptcy court to try to make a claim as a creditor related to a $50 million building that was being sold. Time and lack of knowledge will prevent me from accurately describing everything that went down, but I will do my best. The court handled my client's claim very quickly and easily at first. The court ruled we were not a creditor because our claim was against a tenant, which was correct. Note, we had purchased the claim from someone merely to try to somehow wedge our way into buying the property, which was very transparent to the court. So I could just sit back for the remainder of the hearing and watch the two premier bankruptcy attorneys go at it. One represented the debtor and the owner of the building. The other represented a secured creditor with a lien against the building. They absolutely hated each other on a personal level and were arguing with great venom about the plan to sell the real estate. There was a small break in the action while the judge took care of another matter. When we came back, the secured creditor attorney told the court the following. 1. His client, the creditor, had purchased controlling interest in the debtor, the owner of the building. 2. He had been directed to fire the other attorney. 3. He had been directed to withdraw the motion to sell the real estate. 4. He then did both there in the courtroom. I have practiced for almost 3 decades. It was the most bad bust thing I had ever seen, and was particularly noteworthy because the courtroom was packed with other attorneys watching, and those two attorneys absolutely hated each other. Not a lawyer, but this happened to my family. My husband's kids asked us to fight for full custody after years of systematic abuse from their mom. My stepdaughter was physically shamed and mom decided to marry a guy who was best friends with the guy who assaulted her. Mom never told us what happened, never got her counseling, never reported it to the police. In mediation she brought up a conversation I had with her which she denied ever happening until then. She started saying lie after lie, and all my husband had to say was, my wife had that conversation with you to explain how uncomfortable my daughter is living with this man because he is connected to her sexual assault. The mediator was not amused. She said, you have someone living in your house who is connected to your daughter's assault. Your relationship with your children is broken. She spent the rest of the session sobbing and signed away custody because this was just the tip of the iceberg that we had on her, and she knew it. Hearing her sobbing made me so happy after all she put these kids through. I had to walk my stepdaughter into the police station to report her sexual assault. I usually don't want people to suffer, but after warning her this guy was coming between her and her kids and then her lying about the context of that conversation, I'll make an exception. I tried to stop her from the chain of events that led us to court, and she tried to use it against me. It's so sad that adults will put other people before their own children. It disgusts me. Good on you guys for getting the kids and that poor girl out of that environment. Sitting waiting for my client and the judge is giving a mass colloquy for an alternative program on a DUI. Basically probation. Question: has anyone consumed alcohol or taken drugs in the last 24 hours? Obvious answer aside, one dude proudly raises his hand. I smoked some dope last night. He did not get probation. This guy sounds like Jason on The Good Place. Kind of a self-screw, but the MPAA entered DVD John's code for breaking DVD copy protection as part of their lawsuit into their evidence, which then became public record. The code that breaks DVD copy protection was now available to the entire world, defeating the entire purpose of their lawsuit. That really was a moment of genius. Ianal. But there was a case going on in my town between a father and son that was hilarious. The dad is a big time personal injury attorney around here who started his own firm under his name, George Sink, and his son ended up joining the family business. Well, they had a falling out, so the son goes off to start his own firm. He has his dad's name, so the dad is suing the son for using the name he gave him to start his own law firm. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.